Raheem Morris was the problem in Atlanta. He was not the scapegoat, and he's not the only one. 4 NFL head coaches were fired, and today we are breaking down whether they were either the scapegoat or the real problem in their organization. And the last coach we discussed may stir up some controversy as well, but we got to start with Raheem Morris, who was the real problem in Atlanta. The organization deserves blame as well, which I'll get into later, but Morris simply was not a good head coach. I'll take him as a defensive coordinator any day, but he's now had 5 seasons as a head coach, 3 with Tampa Bay and 2 with Atlanta, and only 1 was over 500. The last 2 were at 8-9 with very talented Atlanta teams. And in today's NFL, where a good head coach can turn around an organization in 1 year, see Mike Vrabel, Ben Johnson, and Liam Cohen, the Raheem Morris firing was justified. So, Joe, I got to kick it to you. Was Raheem Morris the problem, or was he the scapegoat for other problems in the Atlanta Falcons organization?
It's tough to say that. I'd say he's not void of blame. The whole problem, maybe not. I think that when you have a talent like Kyle Pitts and he goes for 5 seasons and this season was his most productive since his rookie year because the offensive system could never figure it out. Like you said, he's a defensive coach. I think that you consistently had either poor quarterback play or you had poor offensive scheme who didn't know how to utilize your weapons, right? And to the credit, they figured it out at the end of the year. A little too late. But I feel that, like, if anything, whoever the offensive coordinator was, I said this when Raheem Morris got fired, I said they need to keep that guy. Because if you can utilize Kyle Pitts, you figured out how Kyle Pitts is working now, and you got the offensive, it was kind of working. Like, that offense was kind of getting going. Kyle Pitts was getting going. They had 3 guys almost get 1,000 yards, and they had injuries at quarterback. Kirk Cousins didn't look all that great except for a few games. But I mean, Kyle Pitts almost probably went over close to 1,000. I know Drake London was almost to 1,000, and you had, one of the best running backs in Bijan almost go to 1,000 receiving yards. So, I mean, you had good offensive production with a good defense, but it was at the end of the year. So I don't know if I would have fired them, but I understand why you did it because of the back-to-back just lackluster seasons, right? And a lot of that had to do with injury under center. I know Michael Penix, we had injury health questions of him coming out of the draft. That's starting to be realized right now that it may never come together for him. I would love to see Michael Penix succeed, but it doesn't seem like that's going to be a possibility with some of the things that are now beginning to compound there. So I'm going to go that Raheem Morris had his opportunity and he's fired with no one to blame but himself.
Yeah, I agree, Joe. And to your point about some of the losses earlier in the season, like you lost to the Jets and you lost to the Dolphins. Like you got nobody else to blame but yourself when you get to the end of the year. And technically they were tied for the division. Like they were all 8-9, the Panthers, the Falcons, and the Bucks. But again, you lose to the Jets, you lose to the Dolphins. You got nobody else to blame but yourself. To be fair to Raheem Morris a little bit, though, Falcons GM Terry Fontenot also deserves some blame. Like he was just fired as well.
Oh, yeah.
Although he hit with a lot of his draft picks, especially in this last draft with Jalen Walker, James Pierce Jr., and Xavier Watts. Those were home run draft picks. He's getting fired, like you mentioned, Joe, for the quarterback decision he made in 2024 for picking Penix 8th overall. He already had injury concerns, and then he tore his ACL again this year after signing Kirk Cousins off an Achilles tear for $160 million, where I think people lost their minds a little bit too much about that decision in the moment. I remember I was defending Terry Fontenot in the Falcons front office after that moment because I understood the thought process. However, it simply hasn't worked. Like it just has not worked well at all for the Atlanta Falcons. But to me, I think the main reason that it hasn't worked in Atlanta is because they are a poorly coached team, although very, very talented. And I think Raheem Morris is to blame for that. But don't get me wrong, Morris definitely got screwed by some injuries this year, without a doubt. But Falcons fans, ask yourselves this, okay? Where would Raheem Morris, if you kept him, rank among NFL head coaches right now? Would he be in the top half? Would he be in the bottom half? I think at best case scenario, he's in the middle of the pack. He's mediocre, and he's probably in that bottom third of NFL head coaches. And we just talked about it in a previous video with John Harbaugh. If you're not getting better, you're getting worse. Okay. And I think Raheem Morris, you can definitely improve on Raheem Morris as a head coach. But Joe, we got to move on. We're moving on to our next head coach firing, and that is Jonathan Gannon. And this one, I'm a little bit conflicted because Jonathan Gannon was a much better coach than I expected him to be. Okay. Especially after some of those weird moments in interviews that we saw from him when he first got the job in his first year. There was an inspirational speech that went awry for Jonathan Gannon as well that did not look good. So he had some weird, awkward moments. but I don't think he's a bad football coach at all. I think Jonathan Gannon can coach. However, the Cardinals underperformed this year like crazy, and a lot of that was due to injury. According to Sports Info Solutions, the Cardinals had the most points missed due to injury this year in the entire NFL. So they were a super banged up football team. And while I think the Cardinals organization is objectively terrible and has been the most underrated dumpster fire of a franchise for the last 30 years in the NFL, I do think his firing was justified strictly because of the lack of success. 15-36 in 3 years. It's hard to excuse your way out of that. It's hard to injury your way out of that. They just haven't been good enough, simply. But I also think he was the scapegoat for the Cardinals organization incompetence and just their overall injuries this year. Hence why I said at the beginning I was very conflicted because, again, there's definitely two ways you can go about this. But Joe, Jonathan Gannon, was he the real problem for the Cardinals, or was he the scapegoat for a terrible organization?
Scapegoat for a terrible organization. Let's be fair here, right? When you put in Jacoby Brissett and your offense explodes, that tells you that your main problem was who you had under center. Now, Kyler Murray deserves the blame for this firing, and I'm going to stand on that rock until it's no longer a rock. All right, that is my soapbox to die on right now, because the guy has had commitment issues. We know that there's the pundits on YouTube have shown that when, new first-person shooter games drop, Kyler Murray's QBR drops just along fucking with them. So I think that Jonathan Gannon 100% is a scapegoat. I think that his quarterback couldn't run the offense effectively. And I think that no matter what they did, Kyler Murray was never going to be able to run that offense effectively. Kyler Murray lived through college and most of his NFL career purely on his athleticism and talent. Like, he's just a better Jamarcus Russell, right? Like he was able to transfer just a little bit better and do a lot more crazier things. But at the end of the day, his commitment to actually learning football and doing things is what's holding him back and held his team back and ultimately got his head coach fired. Kyler Murray is done in Arizona. And I don't think a lot of teams want to look at Kyler Murray. He came with undersized questions. He's got a lot of injuries now, and he's had questionable commitment. Jonathan Gannon deserves credit for trying to keep this franchise afloat with Kyler Murray as his quarterback, because they got into a lot of one-score games late, and they just couldn't finish it out because the quarterback is Jacoby Brissett. Not a bad quarterback. He's a serviceable backup journeyman starter. He doesn't have the gene to come back and make a game-winning drive, but he had great games. And if the defense was just a little bit better, was just a little more healthy, they probably win a few more games, and Jonathan Gannon keeps his job. But at the end of the day, like you said, 3 years, abysmal record, but I can't blame him. I can't.
Yeah, to your point, Joe, I think Gannon does deserve a little bit of blame for sticking with Drew Petzing, the offensive coordinator, for a little bit too long. I don't think Drew Petzing was a good offensive coordinator. But to another one of your points, the offense looks so much better with Jacoby Brissett and Michael Wilson as your QB1, wide receiver one combo instead of Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. So either way, I think it's a move that needed to happen, even though I don't necessarily think Jonathan Gannon is a bad head coach. But again, it doesn't mean that he's the scapegoat, or it doesn't mean that he's not the scapegoat, I should say, for a bad organization in the Arizona Cardinals. But we got to get to this next head coach, Joe, and that is the Raiders firing head coach Pete Carroll. And to me, this one's kind of similar to Jonathan Gannon, where I don't think he was the main issue with the Raiders. I think their biggest issue was a lack of talent on both sides of the ball, where they just had a terrible roster that I don't think any coach was going to have come in and have success with. But Carroll certainly was not a part of the solution going forward in Vegas. First of all, okay, he's too damn old. That's 74 years old. Getting hired in the first place was a mistake. Okay, especially now with the number 1 overall pick, Joe. Where it's assumed they're probably going to pick a quarterback, probably Indiana's Fernando Mendoza. Although I know both of us are not convinced that that's the right move, that's the right direction to go. If you have a young quarterback, it's probably best that you can pair him with a young head coach that he can work with for the foreseeable future. And that simply was not going to be Pete Carroll. He's not going to be the head coach of anything for the foreseeable future. And as far as the season goes, I do blame Pete a lot for the 3-14 record. Bringing in Geno Smith was a bad idea. He had a hand in that. Bringing in Chip Kelly was a terrible idea. He had a hand in that as well. And I know he was a big proponent of drafting Ashton Genty as well. And I've said this multiple times now. I think Genty is a great player, but at 6th overall with drastic needs on your entire roster, especially the offensive line, it would have been smarter to go in a different direction for the Las Vegas Raiders. So although Pete Carroll is a Hall of Famer, and although I'm not sure he was the main problem in Vegas, he needed to go and shouldn't have been hired even in the first place. So Joe, Pete Carroll, okay, is he the Raiders' real problem, or was he the scapegoat for Las Vegas's failures?
I don't think he's the real problem. Right? The real problem was in the front office. You looked at this offensive line and you thought it could be serviceable. I said it on a video where we talked about this. The offensive line is the reason the Raiders are the way the Raiders are. 11% of their pass plays led to sacks, the highest number in the NFL. And then you look at Ashton Jeanty, like I said, getting contacted in the backfield almost consistently. You can only point to one thing, and it's like you didn't try to get to redo the offense, right? You didn't try to go to a quick passing game, leverage quick routes, and then your one sure-handed short yardage over the middle receiver outside of Brock Bowers that gave you 1,000 yards last year, you sent him out of town because you didn't want to give him a long-term commitment. All this screams front office to me. They made bad decisions in the draft, and I can't even blame Geno Smith. I can't. Geno Smith was not the problem. Right. I think that this all stems from the GM, and I think they each have their blames, right? I think that Geno turned the ball over too much. I think that Pete Carroll seemed checked out. At the end of the day, I think that you're not the full problem, but you're not just completely blameless in this either. Like Pete Carroll just coached for an extra year to get a little extra money in his retirement fund to ride off into the sunset. I don't think he was fully committed, especially when the writing was on the wall of what this team is going to look like. And, I'm kind of questioning the commitment of some of the other, veteran players that are on that team because it sounds like Max Crosby wants out.
Yeah, I'm questioning a lot with the Las Vegas Raiders right now, and I don't know what they're going to do with their next head coaching hire. All I know is they need to get it right because they're currently paying.
Tom Brady's running it.
Yeah, and Brady deserves blame too because he obviously had some input on the draft and some input on obviously those hiring decisions. And we talked about it on a previous video. They thought they were ready to win, and they obviously were not even close to being ready to win. But they need to get this next head coaching hire right. They are currently paying 5 other head coaches right now to not coach for their football team. You can't do much worse for the Las Vegas Raiders in terms of hiring head coaches than that. So this next one is going to be one of the most important in the history, maybe in the history of the Las Vegas Raiders franchise, considering like I mentioned before, we do believe they're going to take a quarterback with that number 1 overall pick in this upcoming NFL draft. So they need to get the head coach right because if you want to get the quarterback right, you got to have the head coach in place and the situation in place to have success for that young quarterback. But Joe, we got to move on. It's our final head coaching hire or our final head coaching firing. And it's Kevin Stefanski, okay? And maybe his time just ran its course in Cleveland the last 2 years. Going 8-26 is obviously terrible, but I think he's the scapegoat for the Browns' failure the last 2 seasons. I do not think this man forgot how to coach. I just don't, okay? This is a 2-time coach of the year, okay? Once in 2020 and once in 2023, and it's not like he's been given outstanding rosters, okay? Early in his tenure, the offensive lines were really good. Or early in his tenure with Cleveland, I should say, the offensive lines were really good, and he obviously had Nick Chubb there to run the rock as well. So the running game was really, really good. The last couple of years, the offensive line has been awful, and they can't run the ball because of it. But throughout his entire career, they really haven't had the quarterback. And that's where I think a lot of people are going to disagree with me. Oh, he had Baker the first 2 years, and then he wanted Deshaun Watson. That's his fault, okay? Maybe he wanted Deshaun Watson. Okay, reports were saying that Stefanski didn't want him, but people were also calling him out, saying that those reports were bending the truth, basically. What I saw from Stefanski was, just looking at the numbers, Baker had his second best year of his career in 2020 with Kevin Stefanski in terms of quarterback rating, QBR, touchdown to interception ratio, all second best of Baker's career. Only Baker's 2024 season with Tampa Bay, which, by the way, is starting to look like a bit of an outlier for Baker Mayfield's career. The rest of his career is very much more similar to that 2020 season, but that's a different discussion for a different day. We're not talking strictly Baker Mayfield here. But the next year, Baker Mayfield, that's in 2021, played hurt, and then they decided to move on, and that's where they went to Deshaun Watson. Now, Deshaun Watson obviously came in and looked terrible while he was there, but Joe Flacco came in, and still there, unfortunately, for the Cleveland Browns. But Joe Flacco came in 2023 and absolutely balled out and led them to the playoffs. And at the end of the day, let me put it to you like this, okay? Kevin Stefanski got the Cleveland Browns to the playoffs in 2 out of his first 4 seasons as a head coach. That's got to be one of the greatest accomplishments ever. Taking the Browns to the playoffs twice in 4 years, one of the worst organizations in sports. He deserves a lot of credit for that. I wasn't a huge fan of how Stefanski handled the Shedeur Sanders stuff from this year. I don't like some of the post-firing drama that's came out as well, but I think he's a good head coach and could be hired by another team this season or maybe next. So again, I think Kevin Stefanski was absolutely the scapegoat for the Cleveland Browns organization. Problem. So, Joe, I got to kick it to you. Stefanski, the problem or the scapegoat in Cleveland?
Scapegoat 100%. Like Kevin Stefanski is probably the best head coach on the market right now. 2-time coach of the year, took the Browns to the playoffs with lackluster rosters, right? Especially on the offensive side. I think the front office did him dirty. I think that you drafted 2 quarterbacks and you gave him 2 rookie quarterbacks and Kenny Pickett and Joe Flacco. Either A, you give him Joe Flacco and you give him Kenny Pickett to bring in some competition, and either Shedeur Sanders or Dylan Gabriel. And I said it when Shedeur came out there and started to, open the downfield passing game up a little bit. They started to play competitively in games. I said, if you think Shedeur Sanders is the answer under center, you keep Stefanski. Because the way he played and how he had that offense going with the lack of talent, the youth that was on offense, it was doing very good things. You've now fired him. He's already got an interview with the New York Giants, who I think is a way more ahead roster. They have a lot of defensive talent, a lot of offensive talent. I mean, I think him and Jackson Dart with Cam Scatabo, Tyrone Tracy, Devin Singletary, a healthy Malik Neighbors, Kevin Stefanski in the New York Giants organization is money. They have a quarterback. They have a team. You know that the roster is decent. All they need is a good offensive mind because the defense is going to be okay. And guess what? Suddenly the Giants were there. We forget the Giants had a shot at knocking off the Broncos. They were in a lot of tough games. And as long as you can get Jackson Dart to get down, stop taking these nasty hits, it'll be fine. So this is 100% a scapegoat. And you know what? Actually, this is the only firing that I'm happy because the guy got out. I'm happy for Kevin Stefanski. You deserve better, my friend. And Cleveland fans, you deserve better because your organization clearly is bad.
This has been Between the Uprights. Football is life. The rest is just details.